When a man knocks on a door he has driven past twice without stopping, something inside him already knows that what waits on the other side will change him. Keanu Reeves stood at a gate in Topanga Canyon, California, on a Saturday morning in October 2024. 60 years old, one of the most famous men on the planet. A man who had survived things that would have destroyed most people. The death of his best friend, the loss of a daughter, the kind of grief that doesn't make the papers because there are no words big enough to put in a headline. He had driven this same canyon road twice before and turned back both times. This time he knocked. The woman who opened the door was named Delara Voss. She was 56 years old, silver at her temples, paint on her overarms from the set model she had been building in the back room. She had not seen Keanu Reeves in 25 years, not since a phone call in September 1999 that lasted 11 minutes and ended everything between them so quietly that the rest of the world never even noticed it had happened. She looked at him standing there on her porch. He looked back, and after 4 full seconds of silence, she said, "You look exactly the same." He said, "No, I don't." She said, "No, but your eyes do." She made tea. They sat in the garden. They talked for 3 hours about Portland and motorcycles, and the people they had loved, and the people they had lost. They talked like two people who had earned the right to skip the small stuff and go straight to the real things. And then, as the afternoon light began to go golden over the canyon walls, Keanu looked up at the roofline of the small house. A tiny square window near the top. The attic. Something old moved through him. A feeling he couldn't name. A door he didn't know was there. She saw him looking. She said, "Come back on Saturday. There is something I have been meaning to give you for a very long time." He came back. She led him up a narrow staircase to a low-ceilinged attic that smelled of cedar and old paper. She took him to the far corner, where the light barely reached, and pointed to a cardboard box on the floor. The masking tape sealing it had gone yellow with age. On the lid, drawn in a faded red crayon, 2 stick figures holding hands. "I drew that in 1999, she said. "Right before everything ended. I thought it would be funny." A pause. It stopped being funny. Inside the box was a movie ticket stub from their very first date in Silver Lake in 1997. A photograph of the two of them on a mountain trail above the canyon, laughing at something already forgotten. A pressed flower from the porch of the house where they had once been happy together. And at the very bottom, an envelope, white, sealed for 25 years. His name written on the front in her handwriting. Just his name, nothing else. She said, "Read it alone." "I'll be in the garden." She walked down the stairs, and Keanu Reeves sat down on the dusty attic floor, alone in the warm yellow light of a single bare bulb, and opened a letter that had been waiting for him since September 14, 1999. What he read on those 2 pages did not say what anyone would expect. It was not a confession of love. It was not a goodbye. It was not an apology. It was something far larger than any of those things. Something that reached back 25 years and rearranged everything he thought he knew about the worst period of his life. Something that explained a silence so enormous and so costly that the woman who had chosen it had carried it alone, through a marriage and a grief and an entire second life, without ever telling a single soul. When he finished reading, this man, who had learned to carry loss with a stillness so complete that the internet turned it into a meme, who had buried a best friend and a daughter and a former love, and kept walking, sat on the floor of that attic and wept like a boy. What was in that letter? What had Delara Voss been carrying alone for 25 years? And what did Keanu say when he finally came down those attic stairs and sat across from her in the garden? Stay with us for the whole story, because what happens next is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. We begin not with romance. We begin with loss. Most people know Keanu Reeves as an action hero. Neo in The Matrix, John Wick, The man who flies through the air and lands without flinching. The man who looks danger in the eye and does not blink. On screen, nothing breaks him. Nothing keeps him down. But the people who truly know Keanu Reeves, the ones who sat with him in quiet rooms, who watched him from across tables when he thought no one was looking, those people will tell you something different. They will tell you that behind those dark, still eyes is a man who has been broken more times than almost anyone in Hollywood. Broken cleanly, deeply, and repeatedly, like a bone that heals and gets broken again in the same place. He was born in Beirut, Lebanon, on September 2, 1964. His father left when Keanu was 3. His mother moved him from city to city, Beirut to Sydney to New York to Toronto. A childhood lived out of suitcases, in different schools, with different accents swirling around him each year. He learned early how to be the new person in the room. He learned even earlier how to be alone. By the time Hollywood found him, he already knew what it felt like to lose people. But nothing prepared him for October 31, 1993. That was the night his best friend River Phoenix collapsed outside the Viper Room on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood and died on the pavement at the age of 23. Keanu was 29. River was not just a colleague. He was the kind of friend you find once, the kind who speaks your language before you have even learned you have one. They had been young and hungry and alive together in a way that only happens at the very beginning of things. Keanu stood at the funeral and could not speak. He tried. The words would not come. He sat back down. He did not speak publicly about River Phoenix for many years after that. Some griefs are too large for interviews. Then came 1999, the year that remade him completely. His girlfriend Jennifer Syme gave birth to their daughter on December 24, 1999. The baby, Ava Archer Syme Reeves, was stillborn at 8 months. She never took a breath. She never opened her eyes. Keanu held his daughter's body in a hospital room on Christmas Eve and became a father and lost that title in the same terrible hour. He and Jennifer fell apart after that. Grief does that to people sometimes. It does not always bring two people together. Sometimes it drives them to opposite walls of the same room until the room becomes unbearable and one of them leaves. Jennifer left. Then, in 2001, she left permanently, killed in a car accident on Cahuenga Boulevard in Los Angeles on April 2nd. Keanu was 36. He helped carry her coffin on a warm California morning, his face unreadable, his jaw set in the way of a man who has learned that public grief is a performance he does not know how to give. The public watched all of this and built a story around it. They called him sad, stoic, mysterious. They made a meme out of a photograph, Sad Keanu, taken in May 2010 by photographer Ron Asadorian, showing him sitting alone on a bench in New York City, eating a sandwich, slouched forward, looking at the ground. The internet passed it around like a joke, and then, slowly, like something more tender. People recognized something in it. A man who had been given everything the world considers valuable and still sometimes sat alone on a bench and looked lost. They gave him Reddit threads, fan theories, stories about him riding the subway in New York and giving up his seat and being kind to strangers and tipping generously and showing up to film sets without ego or complaint. The mythology grew enormous. It became its own thing, separate from the man, larger than the man. What the mythology left out, what almost nobody knew, was this. Woven into those years of visible, documented, publicly grieved losses, there was a quieter grief. A relationship that lived and died in the narrow space between his famous tragedies. A love that the tabloids almost missed, that Hollywood barely noticed, that existed in canyon roads and hardware stores and long evenings on a back porch overlooking the hills. A woman named Delara Voss. She was not famous. She left no digital footprint worth searching. She did not sell her story. She did not appear in documentaries or tell-all memoirs. She simply was real and whole and deeply important. And then she was gone, and for 25 years, the world never thought to ask about her. But Keanu thought about her. On the bench in New York with the sandwich, on the film sets in the early mornings, on the long motorcycle rides through canyons that reminded him of a specific light, a specific porch, a specific voice, saying the light here looks like it came from a painter who hadn't slept. He thought about her in the way you think about the thing you lost so quietly that no one came to the funeral. The grief with no meme, the loss with no headline. This is that story. There is a road in Los Angeles that most tourists never find. It does not appear on the highlight reels. It is not Rodeo Drive or the Hollywood Walk of Fame or the wide, sun-drenched sweep of Santa Monica Beach. It is a narrow, winding road that climbs up into the Santa Monica Mountains and disappears into a canyon so green and so quiet that you forget, completely, that one of the loudest cities on Earth is sitting just below you. Topanga Canyon Boulevard, 20 miles northwest of Hollywood. A place where the air smells like sage and eucalyptus, and something older than either. Where artists live in houses tucked into hillsides like they are hiding from something, or hiding for something. Where the neighbors are painters and musicians, and people who came to Los Angeles for one reason and stayed for a completely different one. In the summer of 1997, Keanu Reeves was 32 years old and quietly exhausted. The Devil's Advocate was in production, a dark, beautiful film about a lawyer who sells his soul in New York City, directed by Taylor Hackford, with Al Pacino playing the devil himself. Keanu had taken the role because it asked something real of him. It was not an action film. It was a film about a man who loses himself so gradually that he does not notice until it is too late. Keanu understood that story in his bones. He rented a modest house in Topanga because he needed quiet between shooting days. He had a reputation already, even at 32, for not fitting the Hollywood mold. He did not go to the parties. He rode motorcycles on canyon roads at hours when no one else was awake. He read philosophy, Dostoevsky, Camus, books with cracked spines that he carried in jacket pockets. He showed up to sets early and left without making an entrance or an exit. He was, by most accounts, genuinely good company, warm and funny and present in the way that people who have known real loss sometimes are, as if grief had burned away everything unnecessary and left only the parts worth keeping. He was also, in the summer of 1997, alone. Delara Voss was 29 years old and did not know yet that her life was about to change direction. She had grown up between worlds, literally and emotionally. Her father, Willem Voss, was a Dutch architect from Amsterdam, precise and cerebral, a man who believed that structure was a form of love. Her mother, Shirin Moradi, was an Iranian poet from Tehran who had left during the revolution and carried her homeland entirely inside language. In the way she described colors, the way she named things, the way she turned ordinary moments into something that felt ancient and necessary. Delara had inherited both of them completely. She had her father's eye for structure and her mother's hunger for beauty. She became a set designer because it was the only profession she found that required both: the ability to build something solid and the ability to make it feel like something true. By 1997, she was working on a small, independent film being shot in the hills near Topanga, a quiet drama about a family falling apart and coming back together, the kind of film that wins awards at small festivals and disappears everywhere else. She was renting a room in a shared house on Old Topanga Canyon Road and driving her battered 1991 Honda Civic up and down the mountain each morning with a coffee balanced on the dashboard and the windows down. She was happy in the particular way of someone who has found the right work, even if they haven't yet found the right life. Purposeful, useful, not lonely exactly, but with a space in her that she had not yet found a name for. They met on a Tuesday morning in August 1997 at a hardware store in Calabasas, a town sitting at the mouth of the canyon, ordinary and sun-baked, The kind of place that exists to supply the people who live somewhere more interesting. This is not a glamorous detail. There was no music. Nobody's eyes met across a candlelit room. They were both standing in the fasteners aisle. She was looking for specific gauge screws for a set piece she was building. He was buying a padlock for a gate at the rental house. And they both reached into the same plastic bin of washers at exactly the same moment, and their hands almost touched, and they both pulled back and laughed. It was the laugh that did it, not his face, though his face was, objectively, remarkable. Not his name. She placed him a moment later and felt a brief flutter of recognition that she immediately chose to ignore, because she was not the kind of woman who was moved by fame. It was the laugh, unguarded, genuine, the laugh of a man who was not performing anything for anyone. He offered to buy her coffee at the place down the road. She said yes because she had no particular reason to say no to a man who laughed like that. They sat in a window booth for 2 hours. She told him about the film she was designing. He told her about The Devil's Advocate, about playing a man who doesn't realize he's losing his soul. She said, without thinking, "That's the most frightening kind of loss, isn't it? The kind you don't feel happening." He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "Yes, exactly that." She did not know it yet, but that was the moment. That was the sentence that changed everything. They dated for nearly 2 years, and nobody made a headline out of it. This was, in its own quiet way, a miracle. In 1997 and 1998, Keanu Reeves was one of the most recognizable faces on Earth. Speed had made him a star in 1994. Johnny Mnemonic, A Walk in the Clouds, Chain Reaction. Film after film had kept his face on magazine covers and his name in entertainment columns. The paparazzi knew his motorcycle. They knew his usual routes. They staked out the restaurants in Silver Lake and Los Feliz, where actors went to pretend they were not famous. And yet somehow, through luck, through Dalara's deliberate invisibility, through the fact that Topanga Canyon is the kind of place where people have learned to look away from other people's private lives, they were left almost entirely alone. They went to the movies. They hiked the trails above the canyon on Sunday mornings, when the light came low and golden through the oak trees. They cooked in the small kitchen of the house on Old Topanga Canyon Road, which had become, gradually and without any formal announcement, their house, her name on the lease. His presence so constant and comfortable that the neighbors simply accepted him as part of the landscape. He read to her sometimes. Not poetry, he was not a poetry person, he always said, though she suspected he was lying. Philosophy mostly. Long passages from Albert Camus that he would read aloud and then stop and say, "Do you think that's true?" As if it genuinely mattered what she thought. And it did. That was the thing about Keanu, that she had not expected and could not stop thinking about. He was interested. In ideas. In her specifically. In the way her mind worked. The way she saw things. The particular angle from which Dalara Voss looked at the world. He told her once, sitting on the back porch in the last light of a September evening, that being with her was the first time in years he had felt like a person rather than a symbol. She had laughed and said, "You were always a person. You just forgot for a while." He had looked at the canyon and been quiet for a long time after that. Those were the good years, the real ones. The ones she would carry forward in the way you carry a photograph in a wallet. Not looked at every day, but always there, always within reach, always slightly worn at the edges from being handled in private moments. Then came 1999, and everything the canyon had been protecting them from came rushing in at once. It arrived first as triumph. March 31st, 1999. The Matrix opened in theaters across the United States, and within a single weekend, rewrote the rules of what an action film could be. Audiences sat in darkened theaters and watched Keanu Reeves bend reality, dodge bullets in slow motion, fall from buildings, move through a digital world with a kind of eerie, perfect calm. And they decided, collectively and immediately, that he was something more than an actor. He was an icon. The film made $171 million in its opening weeks in North America alone. It would go on to gross over $460 million worldwide. The Wachowskis had built something enormous, and Keanu was at the center of it, still and powerful, the eye of a storm he had not fully anticipated. The world came for him all at once. Studios sent scripts by the boxload. Agents called at hours that suggested they had forgotten time zones existed. Journalists wanted access. Photographers followed the motorcycle. The quiet canyon life, the Sunday hikes, the kitchen cooking, the Camus on the porch, began to feel like something that belonged to a different version of a life. A version that was slipping, slowly, out of reach. Delara watched this happen with the careful attention of a woman who had always understood that structures, however beautifully built, could be unmade by forces larger than themselves. She did not panic. She was not a panicking kind of person. But she felt the change in him, a new tension in his shoulders, a new distance in his eyes sometimes, the way his phone had become a thing he carried with guilt rather than ease. She told herself it was temporary. Famous people had busy seasons. This would pass. He would come back to the porch and the canyon and the questions about Camus. She was half right. He did come back. But something had shifted in the gravitational field of his life, and she had not yet understood what it meant. Then came April 1999, and a party she was not invited to, and a name she had not yet heard. David Lynch, the director, the painter, the architect of cinematic strangeness, threw a gathering at his home in the Hollywood Hills. Keanu went because Lynch was Lynch, and you did not decline an invitation from David Lynch. It was the kind of party where artists and filmmakers and musicians moved around each other in the dark, like planets in a slow orbit. That was where he met Jennifer Syme. She was 28 years old, dark-haired and bright-eyed and recklessly, dangerously alive in the way of people who have not yet learned that life requires some caution. She worked as a personal assistant to Lynch himself. She laughed loudly and moved through rooms like she owned them, and did not appear to notice or care that Keanu Reeves was a person the world had just decided was extraordinary. That indifference, probably, was what got him. Delara found out the way people find out things they were never supposed to know. Sideways, accidentally, through no fault of their own. A mutual friend's Polaroid photograph, passed around at a gathering in Venice Beach in late spring. Keanu and Jennifer at a table together, his head tilted toward hers, laughing. The photograph was not scandalous. It was not even, technically, evidence of anything. But Delara looked at it and felt something cold move through her. Not jealousy exactly. Something quieter and more certain than jealousy. Recognition. She had seen that tilt of his head before. She knew what it meant. She drove home to Topanga Canyon. She sat on the back porch where they had read Camus together and watched the light leave the hills. She breathed in the sage and the eucalyptus and the particular smell of the canyon at dusk. Then she went inside and called him. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. We do not know, and should not pretend to know, every word that passed between them in those 11 minutes. But we know how it ended. We know that by September 1999, it was over. No announcement, no public scene, no tabloid story. Just two people who had been quietly everything to each other, quietly becoming nothing. Delara hung up the phone. She sat in the kitchen for a long time without moving. She did not know yet, could not have known yet, that she was carrying something that would change the meaning of this ending entirely. She did not know yet about the 4 days that would follow, about the appointment, about the number she would see on a small screen in a clinic in Santa Monica, and the way the world would tilt on its axis and keep going as if nothing had happened. She did not know yet that the worst of this story had not arrived. It was still 4 days away. 4 days later, on a Tuesday morning in September 1999, Delara Voss drove alone to a clinic on Wilshire Boulevard in Santa Monica, and sat in a waiting room with a paper cup of water she did not drink and a magazine she did not read. The nurse called her name. She went in. She lay on a table beneath fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency she would never forget, a small, persistent sound, like something trying to get out. The technician was kind, professional. She moved the small instrument across Dilara's skin with practiced gentleness, and then went quiet, in the way that medical people go quiet when they are looking at something that requires their full attention. Then she turned the small screen so Dilara could see it. 6 weeks. A shape so small it barely existed. A flickering, barely visible, barely real, that was nevertheless, undeniably, unmistakably, a heartbeat. Dilara looked at that flickering for a long time. She drove home to Topanga Canyon in silence. She did not turn on the radio. She took the long way up the canyon road, the winding way, the slow way, and she pulled over once at a turnout above the valley and sat with the engine off and looked at Los Angeles, spread out below her in the September haze, enormous and indifferent and glittering. And she thought about what came next. She thought about calling Keanu. She reached for her phone twice, put it down twice. Because here is what Dilara Voss knew in that moment, sitting at that turnout above the canyon, that almost no one else in the world knew yet. Jennifer Syme was also pregnant. A mutual friend, someone who moved in the overlapping circles of Los Angeles film people, had mentioned it quietly, carefully, in the way people mention things they are not sure they should be mentioning. Jennifer and Keanu. Expecting. Early days. Very private. Dilara sat with both of these facts simultaneously, her own flickering heartbeat on a small screen, and the knowledge that the father of her unborn child was already walking toward fatherhood with someone else. And she made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a martyr's decision, a quiet one. The kind of decision that looks from the outside like simply doing nothing, the kind that costs everything precisely because nobody sees you paying. She would not call him. She had ended their relationship. He had moved forward. He was about to become a father, was already becoming one, in the invisible way that fatherhood begins before anyone is ready. Adding her voice to that moment, her news to that weight, it felt to Dilara less like honesty and more like cruelty. She was not a cruel person. So she chose silence. She drove back down the canyon. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around the mug, and she began the long, private work of figuring out how to carry something alone. 3 weeks later, on October 14, 1999, she lost the baby. It happened in the early morning. She was alone in the house, on Old Topanga Canyon Road. Her roommate had moved out in August, and she had not yet found anyone to replace her. The canyon was dark and very quiet. The kind of quiet that feels, at certain moments, less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. She drove herself to Santa Monica UCLA Medical Center. She checked in at the front desk. She answered the questions they asked her. She did everything that was required of her in the correct order and with the correct information. And she did not cry in front of anyone. She cried in the car on the way home, on the canyon road, in the dark, with the windows up. She named the baby that same morning, sitting in the kitchen again. The same chair, the same table, the same mug, the same canyon outside the window. She opened the journal she used for set design notes and turned to a clean page at the back and wrote a single word. Lena, her grandmother's name. Her mother's mother, who had lived through the revolution and lost 3 houses and 2 brothers, and still, somehow, managed to believe that beauty was not optional. A woman Dilara had loved, with the specific ferocity you reserve for people who teach you how to survive. She wrote the name. She closed the journal. She did not tell her mother. She did not tell her father in Amsterdam. She did not tell the mutual friend who had mentioned Jennifer's pregnancy so carefully in passing. She did not post anything, call anyone, reach out to Keanu, reach out to a therapist. None of the things that the modern world would later suggest were necessary and healthy and correct. She simply carried it. The way her grandmother had carried revolutions, the way her mother had carried exile, the way women in her family had always carried the things that the world did not make adequate space for, quietly, internally, with a posture so straight that nobody looking at her from outside would ever guess the weight. By November 1999, she had packed the cardboard box. The movie stub from LA Confidential, their first real date, a theater in Silver Lake, 1997. The photograph from the mountain trail above Topanga, the pressed bougainvillea from the porch, and a letter she sat down to write on a Sunday evening with the canyon wind moving through the eucalyptus trees outside, addressed to a man she was no longer allowed to call. She sealed it. She wrote his name on the front in her careful architectural handwriting. She put it at the bottom of the box. She drew 2 stick figures on the lid in crayon. She had found a broken red crayon in a kitchen drawer, and it seemed, in that moment, like the right instrument for the job. She sealed the box with masking tape. She put it in the back of her closet and did not open it again. Life, to its credit, did not stop. By 2001, she had moved to Portland, Oregon, far enough from Los Angeles to breathe differently, close enough to the West Coast that the light still felt familiar. She found work quickly with a regional theater company, the Portland Center Stage, designing sets for productions that ranged from Arthur Miller to newly commissioned plays by writers nobody had heard of yet, but everybody would. She was good at the work, exceptionally good, the kind of designer who could look at an empty black stage and see, immediately and completely, what it wanted to become. Directors trusted her. Crews liked her. She had the rare combination of a strong vision and a complete absence of ego about it. She built worlds for other people's stories and found that satisfying in a way that asked nothing back. She made friends slowly, the way private people do. A costume designer named Petra Halverson, who became her closest companion for the next decade. A director named Marcus Webb, who challenged her and infuriated her and made her better. Small dinner parties in her apartment near Northwest 23rd Avenue, where people argued about theater and politics and the best way to cook lamb, and nobody talked about Hollywood. She was, by any reasonable measure, rebuilding. And then in 2004, at a fundraiser for the theater company, she met Tomás Ferreira. He was 39. A structural engineer, Portuguese-American, born in Newark, New Jersey, raised partly in Lisbon. He was quiet in rooms the way load-bearing walls are quiet. You don't notice them until you understand that without them, everything falls. He had dark eyes and very still hands, and he listened to people the way that almost nobody listens anymore. Fully, without preparing his next sentence while you were still finishing yours. He asked Delara about her work. She told him. He asked careful, intelligent questions. Not the polite questions people ask when they want to seem interested, but the questions of someone who was actually trying to understand how a thing worked. She thought, this is a person who knows how to pay attention. They married in 2006 in a small civil ceremony at Portland City Hall. Her mother flew in from Los Angeles, where Shireen had eventually settled, and cried beautifully, and read a poem in Farsi that half the guests didn't understand, and all of them felt. Her father came from Amsterdam with a new suit and shook Tomas's hand for a long time without speaking, which was, for Willem Voss, the highest possible expression of approval. It was a good marriage, not a thunderstorm of a marriage. Not the kind of love that remakes you from the ground up, that Delara had perhaps once known, briefly, in a canyon house in the hills above Los Angeles, but good in deeper, more sustainable ways. Safe, honest, built on the right foundations, as a structural engineer and an architect's daughter might have both recognized and appreciated. They had a dog named Arlo, a large, uncoordinated golden retriever who destroyed 2 of Delara's set models and showed no remorse. They had a garden in the backyard of their house near Ladd's Addition, where Tomas grew tomatoes and Delara grew roses, and neither of them was particularly successful, but both of them kept trying. They had Sunday mornings that lasted until noon, and a specific table at a specific cafe on SE Division Street that the staff knew was theirs. She did not tell Tomas about Lena, not because she didn't trust him. She trusted him completely. But there are some griefs that exist in a room inside you that was built before the person you love arrived. A room with its own architecture, its own light, its own locked door. And opening that door feels less like sharing and more like disturbing something that has finally, after years of effort, found its resting place. She kept the cardboard box in storage. When they moved house in 2011, she moved it with them without opening it. When they moved again in 2016, she moved it again. Tomas never asked about it. He was not an asking kind of man. He saw the box on a shelf in the storage unit once and looked at it briefly. The crayon stick figures, the masking tape, the single name written on the side in her handwriting, and then looked away, because Tomas Ferreira understood, better than most, that some things belong only to the person carrying them. He died on a Tuesday in October 2019. Oregon Health and Science University Hospital on the hill above Portland, in a room with a window that faced west toward the Tualatin Mountains. Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. 14 months that Delara would later describe, to the very few people she discussed it with at all, as the most concentrated experience of love she had ever witnessed. Not her love for him, though that was real and present and enormous. His love for her. The way a man facing death turns toward the person he chose and stays turned, all the way to the end, without looking away. She held his hand. He looked at the mountains through the window. His last words to her were practical and perfect and entirely Tomas. The tomatoes are going to need another week. She laughed. He smiled. He closed his eyes. She drove home through Portland in the October rain and sat in the garden in a coat, and did not go inside until it was fully dark and she was completely wet, and Arlo was pressing his enormous head against her knee with the focused concern of an animal who knows something is wrong without knowing what. After Tomas, something in Delara shifted. Not broke. She had broken before. Quietly, privately, in a car on a canyon road in 1999. And she knew what breaking felt like. And this was different. This was more like a long-locked door finally developing enough rust that it simply opened. On its own, without drama. She started thinking about the past. Not obsessively, not destructively, but with a new honesty. The honesty of someone who has run out of reasons to protect themselves from their own history. She started writing. Long entries in new journals. Letters to Tomas that she kept in a drawer by the bed. And sometimes, increasingly, letters to other people. People she had left behind. Things she had left unsaid. The cardboard box came out of storage. She sat with it on the floor of the bedroom for a long time without opening it. Then, she put it back. Not yet. Not in Portland. Not in this house that was still entirely Tomas's house. Still shaped around his absence. Still smelling faintly of the bread he used to make on Saturday mornings. In 2022, she sold the house in Portland. It was too large and too quiet, and every room had a specific, located memory that she found she could not stop bumping into. She called an estate agent in Los Angeles. She bought a small sun-bleached house in Topanga Canyon. The agent thought it was sentiment that brought her back, and it was. But it was also something more precise than sentiment. It was the understanding, arriving late, arriving slowly, the way all important understandings arrive, that there was a story she had been carrying for 25 years that needed, finally, to be put down, not buried, not burned, just given to the person it had always belonged to. If he ever came back, she moved the cardboard box into the attic. She put it in the far corner, She left it there, and then she waited, not desperately, not with any particular plan, in the way of a woman who has learned that some things cannot be forced. Some things can only be made ready for. The canyon smelled exactly the same. The light still looked like it came from a painter who hadn't slept. She planted roses in the garden. She let the waiting be quiet. While Delara was learning to wait, Keanu Reeves was learning something harder. He was learning how to be happy. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Not for a man who had spent the better part of 3 decades becoming so fluent in loss that happiness felt, at first, like a language he had forgotten how to speak. Like picking up a book in a tongue you once knew as a child, and finding that the words are almost familiar, close enough to recognize, far enough to stumble over. The person who taught him that language again was Alexandra Grant. They had known each other since 2009. A quiet, growing friendship between a filmmaker and a visual artist that deepened over years and dinners and collaborative projects and long conversations that neither of them rushed. Alexandra was not impressed by fame. She was not interested in the mythology the internet had built around him. She was interested in him, in the specific, particular person who showed up to her studio and looked at her paintings with genuine attention and asked questions that proved he had actually been looking. They had collaborated on 2 books together, Ode to Happiness in 2011 and Shadows in 2016, art books that combined his words with her visual responses, quiet, intimate projects that existed entirely outside the Hollywood machine. When they finally stepped onto a red carpet together in November 2019 at the LACMA Art Plus Film Gala in Los Angeles, Alexandra's silver hair unmistakable, both of them laughing as if the cameras were a minor inconvenience. The internet reacted with something that looked remarkably like collective relief, as if the world had been holding its breath on his behalf for 20 years and had finally, watching that photograph, been allowed to exhale. Keanu at 55 looked lighter than he had in decades. Not younger. He was not trying to be younger. Just lighter. Like a man who had finally agreed to put down something very heavy he had been carrying for a very long time. He still rode motorcycles. He had co-founded Arch Motorcycle Company with master builder Gard Hollinger in 2011, a custom motorcycle manufacturer based in Los Angeles that built handcrafted bikes for people who understood that a motorcycle is not merely transportation, but a specific relationship between a person and the road beneath them. The company had grown steadily, quietly, in Keanu's preferred manner, without spectacle, on the strength of the work itself. He still rode alone sometimes, early mornings on canyon roads, before the city woke up, when the air was cold and the light was new, and it was possible to be Keanu Reeves the person, rather than Keanu Reeves the symbol, for 60 uninterrupted minutes. He was, by 2024, genuinely well. Not performing wellness. Not the careful, managed okayness of a public figure who has learned which words to use in interviews. Actually, quietly, in the daily texture of his life, well. But wellness, he had learned, is not the same as wholeness. There are rooms inside a person that happiness cannot reach. Not because happiness isn't large enough, but because those rooms were sealed before happiness arrived, and the key belongs to someone else entirely. He did not think about Delara every day. He was honest enough with himself to know that. Life had moved, as life insists on moving, and there were entire weeks and months when the canyon house and the porch, and the questions about Camus existed only as a soft, peripheral presence, something felt rather than thought, the emotional equivalent of a sound you can't quite locate. But it came back. Specific and sudden and unbidden, the way these things always do. A smell of eucalyptus on a warm evening, a particular angle of late afternoon light on a hillside, a woman in a hardware store reaching for something on a high shelf and laughing when she couldn't reach it. Small things, ordinary things. The kinds of things that grief uses when it wants to remind you it is still there. In August 2024, Keanu was in Los Angeles for a charity motorcycle event. The kind of event he attended not for the cameras, but for the actual riding. For the community of people who understood what it meant to be alive on a machine, at speed on an open road. Afterward, at dinner at a small restaurant in Silver Lake, the same neighborhood where he and Delara had once seen LA Confidential in a theater that no longer existed, a mutual friend sat across from him. A production designer named Suri Nakamura, who had worked in Los Angeles theater for 20 years and knew everyone and forgot nothing. Suri was talking about Topanga, a house she had visited recently, a woman she had reconnected with after years. She said the name so casually. The way you say the name of someone you assume the other person has long since stopped thinking about. Delara Voss. Keanu went very still. The table kept talking. Someone made a joke. Someone refilled a glass. The ordinary machinery of a dinner party continued turning around him, while he sat inside a sudden, complete silence that nobody else at the table could hear. "Which house?" he said finally. Suri looked at him. Something passed across her face. Recognition, and then a careful neutrality. "Topanga Canyon," she said. "She moved back in 2022. Little place off the main road. She has a garden." Keanu nodded slowly. He picked up his glass. He set it back down without drinking. "Is she well?" he asked. "She is," Suri said. And then, after a pause that contained more information than the words that followed it, "She's been there 2 years. I think she's been waiting for something. I don't know what." Keanu said nothing more about it that evening. But on the drive home, on the canyon roads, in the dark, on the motorcycle, with the August air warm against his jacket and the Los Angeles basin glittering below him like a second sky, he thought about a back porch, a specific light, a voice saying something true about the most frightening kind of loss. He thought about 2 years of waiting. He thought about what a person might be waiting for. He took the long way home. He did not go immediately. This is important. It would be easier, more romantic, more cinematic, to say that he got on the motorcycle that same August night and rode straight to Topanga Canyon and knocked on her door in the dark. That is the version a film would tell. A man hears a name and follows it like a compass needle finding north. But Keanu Reeves was not a film character. He was a 60-year-old man who had learned, through the specific curriculum of his own life, that rushing toward unfinished things without preparation was how you broke them further. So he waited. He thought about it for 3 weeks. He talked to Alexandra. Not about everything, not yet, but enough. He told her there was someone from a long time ago who had come back into the periphery of his life. Someone he owed, he thought, a conversation. Alexandra listened in the way she always listened, fully, without flinching, without making it smaller than it was. She asked one question. "Is this something you need to do?" He said yes. She said, "Then do it properly." This was why he loved her. Not despite her directness, but entirely because of it. He drove to Topanga Canyon twice before he actually stopped. The first time was a Sunday morning in early September 2024. He rode the motorcycle up the canyon road slowly, found the turnoff Suri had described, sat at the end of it for 4 full minutes looking at a gate he could not see past, and then rode back down without stopping. He told himself he needed more time. This was partially true. The second time was a Wednesday evening 2 weeks later. He drove his car this time. Less conspicuous than the motorcycle, more private. He got as far as the gate. He could see the house from there, small and sun-bleached, exactly as Suri had described, with a garden visible around the side, and wind chimes on the porch moving in the canyon breeze. A light was on in a back room. Someone was home. He sat outside that gate for 7 minutes. Then he drove back down the canyon and went home. He called Suri that night. "If you were going to mention to her that we talked," he said, "when might you do that?" A pause. Then Suri, who was a perceptive woman and had clearly been waiting for this call. "I already did. Last week. I hope that was all right. What did she say? Another pause. Longer this time. She said, and I'm quoting exactly, "I know. I've been wondering when." He knocked on her door on a Saturday afternoon in October 2024. The canyon was doing what the canyon does in October. That particular California autumn that is not autumn in any traditional sense. No red leaves or cold mornings, but something subtler and more specific. A change in the quality of the light. A slight cooling of the air in the evenings. A smell of dry grass and distant wood smoke that tells you, despite all visual evidence to the contrary, that something is turning. He had not dressed for an occasion. Dark jeans, a worn jacket, his hair longer than he sometimes kept it, touched at the temples with gray. He was 60 years old and looked it and did not appear to mind. He knocked and then stood back slightly, not retreating, just giving the door space to open without him crowding it. He heard footsteps, a pause, just a breath, just a moment, on the other side of the door. Then it opened. Delara Voss stood in the doorway in paint-stained overalls. She had been working on a set model in the back room, a small architectural miniature for a production she was designing at a theater in Santa Monica. There was a streak of gray paint along her left forearm. Her hair was pulled back loosely, silver at the temples and the crown, darker beneath. She was 56 years old, and she looked, Keanu thought, like someone who had arrived somewhere. Not someone who was still in transit, still becoming. Someone who had arrived. She looked at him for 4 full seconds without speaking. He looked back. The canyon wind moved through the eucalyptus trees above the house. The wind chimes on the porch made their small, bright sound. Somewhere in the garden something rustled. A bird, probably, or just the roses moving. "You look exactly the same," she said. "No, I don't," he said. "No," she agreed. The corner of her mouth moved. "But your eyes do." She made tea. Not coffee. Tea, because she had become a tea person sometime in the Portland years and had never gone back. She made it in a small clay pot that had been her mother Shirin's, brought back from a trip to Tehran in the early 90s, painted with small blue flowers that had mostly worn away. She moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who has made peace with the space they occupy. No performance, no fuss, just the ordinary grace of a person comfortable in their own house. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her, and said nothing, and felt, with a force that surprised him, how much he had missed this specific thing. Not her, exactly, or not only her. This. The quality of silence between two people who once knew each other deeply and are finding, carefully, whether that knowledge still holds. They took the tea into the garden. The roses were in their late-season bloom. Deep red, slightly overblown, the kind of beauty that is made more beautiful by the knowledge that it is almost finished. A small iron table, 2 mismatched chairs, the canyon dropping away below the garden wall in its ancient, unhurried way. They talked for 3 hours. About Tomas, she spoke about him plainly, without performance, in the way of someone who has processed a grief honestly, rather than managed it. About Portland and the theater company, and a production of Tennessee Williams she had designed 3 years ago that she was still quietly proud of. About Arlo, the golden retriever, who had died in 2021, and whose absence she still noticed every morning. He talked about Alexandra, openly, warmly, with the specific ease of a man who is not hiding his happiness. About the motorcycle company, and a new model they had been developing for 2 years. About a film he had recently finished. John Wick, Chapter 4 had come out in 2023, and he spoke about it with the slight bemusement of a man who finds it genuinely funny that the world's appetite for watching him be violent shows no signs of slowing. She laughed at that. A real laugh, not polite, not performed. The laugh of someone who finds something actually funny. He had forgotten how much he liked that laugh. They talked the way people talk when they have decided, mutually and without discussion, to be honest. Not brutal, honest. There is a difference. Brutal honesty uses truth as a weapon. The honesty between them that afternoon was something gentler. Truth used as an offering. Here is who I am now. Here is what I have lived. I am showing you because I trust you with it. They did not talk about 1999. Not directly, not yet. It was present in the conversation the way a large piece of furniture is present in a room. You are aware of it. You navigate around it. You do not pretend it isn't there, but you also do not sit on it until you are ready. As the afternoon light began its slow, golden descent toward the canyon walls, that specific Topanga light, the painter who hadn't slept light, Keanu set down his teacup and looked up at the house. His eyes moved, without any particular intention, toward the roofline. A small square window near the top, the attic. A single pane of glass catching the last of the afternoon sun. Something old and instinctive moved through him. The feeling of a door he couldn't name. A room he didn't know was there. "You've been here since 2022?" he asked. "Yes." "You moved back because of the canyon?" She was quiet for just a moment. One beat longer than a simple answer requires. "I moved back," she said carefully, "because I had some things to deal with." He looked at the attic window again, the small square of glass, the light behind it going gold. "Old things?" he said. The garden was very quiet. The roses moved slightly in the evening breeze. Somewhere down the canyon, a bird called once and then stopped. Delara looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been carrying something for 25 years and has just felt, for the first time, the possibility of setting it down. "Come back on Saturday," she said. Her voice was steady and quiet and utterly certain. "There is something I have been meaning to give you for a very long time." He held her gaze. He did not ask what it was. He understood, in the wordless way that people understand things they are not yet ready to hear spoken aloud, that the question would keep until Saturday, that some things cannot be rushed, that the answer had already waited 25 years and could manage one more week. He nodded. He stood. He thanked her for the tea. He walked to the gate and turned once. Not dramatically, just the natural turn of a person checking something. And she was still sitting at the iron table in the garden, with her hands around her empty cup, watching him go, her face open and unreadable in the failing light. He drove down the canyon road slowly. He did not take the long way home this time. He had somewhere to return to, someone waiting, a life that was real and present and good. But somewhere beneath all of that, beneath the happiness, beneath the wholeness, beneath everything he had built and earned and finally allowed himself, something old and quiet was stirring. A door, long sealed, developing rust, getting ready, slowly, to open. He came back on Saturday. The canyon was quieter than the week before. An inland marine layer had moved in overnight, the kind of low gray sky that sits on top of the Santa Monica Mountains in October, like a held breath, softening everything, muting the colors, making the world feel closer and more private than usual. No hard shadows, no glare, just a diffused, even light that made the house look like something from a painting that hadn't quite dried yet. He knocked at 10 in the morning. She opened the door immediately, not as if she had been waiting behind it, but as if she had simply been nearby and ready. She was wearing a dark green sweater and her hair was down. No paint on her arms today. She had, he noticed, made an effort that she was deliberately not making obvious. He found this enormously moving and said nothing about it. She handed him a cup of tea without asking if he wanted one. He accepted it without asking what kind it was. These small, wordless negotiations, the language of people who once knew each other well and are discovering that the knowledge is still there, stored somewhere below the waterline of conscious memory, available when needed, felt to Keanu like something he had not experienced in a very long time. The ease of being known. Not famous known, not culturally known. Actually, specifically, personally known. They did not linger in the kitchen. She set her own cup down on the counter after one sip and looked at him with the expression of someone who has rehearsed the next part and then decided to stop rehearsing and simply do it. "Come on," she said. The attic was accessed through a narrow door at the end of the upstairs hallway, the kind of low, almost apologetic door that older California houses sometimes have, as if the attic itself is shy about existing. The door had a small iron latch, the kind you lift with your thumb. It opened onto a steep, uncarpeted staircase. She went first. He followed. The space at the top was low-ceilinged and warm despite the gray morning outside. Heat collected up here, trapped under the roof tiles, producing a dry, close atmosphere that smelled of cedar and old paper and something else underneath, something softer and harder to name. The smell of stored time, maybe. The particular scent of objects that have been kept rather than discarded. Things that someone decided, again and again across years and moves and entire chapters of a life, were worth carrying forward. A single bare bulb hung on a cord from the center beam. Delara pulled it on. The light it cast was yellow and immediate, and made the shadows in the corners very dark. There were boxes along the left wall, labeled in her precise handwriting: Portland 2001, Portland Theater 2008, Tomas, books. The last one written differently from the others, the letters slightly larger, slightly more careful. The handwriting of someone paying attention to what they were writing rather than simply labeling a container. She did not go to those boxes. She went to the far corner, the right side of the attic, where the roof line sloped lowest, and you had to duck slightly to move through the space. Back where the light from the single bulb barely reached, there was a box there, different from the others, older, the cardboard softened with age. Its original brown color faded to something closer to gray. The masking tape sealing it had yellowed and curled slightly at the edges. The adhesive dried to the consistency of old amber. It had been sealed a long time. It had been moved a long time. It had the particular quality of an object that has survived not because anyone actively preserved it, but because someone simply could not bring themselves to let it go. On the top, in faded red crayon, two stick figures, side by side, holding hands. The drawing of someone who was never going to show it to anyone, and so drew it truthfully, without self-consciousness, the way children draw, and most adults forget how to. Keanu crouched down in front of it. He looked at the stick figures for a long time. The crayon had faded from red to a dusty rose color, still visible, still legible as what it was, but worn by time into something gentler than it had originally been. Like most things, he thought. Like most things that survive long enough. "I drew that," Delara said from behind him. Her voice was even. Practiced evenness. The evenness of someone managing something large. In Topanga, in 1999, right before everything ended, I thought it would be funny. A pause. It stopped being funny. He did not turn around. He kept looking at the two figures on the box, their simple lines, their joined hands, their complete unawareness of everything that was coming. "Can I open it?" he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "That's why you're here," she said. He lifted the box and carried it to the center of the attic, where the light was better, and set it on the floor and crouched beside it. Delara stayed back. Not far, just enough. Close enough to be present. Far enough to give him room. He worked the masking tape loose carefully, not tearing, peeling, the way you handle something you understand to be fragile. It came away slowly, the dried adhesive releasing with a faint sound like a whispered word. He opened the flaps. Inside, the objects were arranged with the deliberate care of someone who had thought about the order. Not randomly packed but placed. Considered, each thing given its own space. A movie ticket stub. Small and faded, the ink barely legible. He picked it up and tilted it toward the light and read it, and something in his chest moved without warning. A physical sensation, like a hand pressing briefly against the inside of his ribs. L.A. Confidential. A theater in Silver Lake, 1997. He remembered it completely and suddenly, The way memory works when it has been stored somewhere dark and dry and is suddenly exposed to light. The theater, the terrible seats, the way she had laughed at something in the film that nobody else in the audience laughed at, and he had turned to look at her face rather than the screen. He set the ticket stub down carefully on the attic floor. Next, a photograph. Square, slightly faded at the edges. Two people on a mountain trail above Topanga Canyon, both squinting into the sun, both caught mid-laugh at something already forgotten. He studied it for a long moment. Not the version of himself in the photograph, young and unguarded in the way you are before the world gets its hands on you properly, but her. The way she stood, the way she laughed, the way she looked in that photograph, like someone who had no idea how much she was going to be missed. He set the photograph beside the ticket stub. A small pressed flower, bougainvillea, deep pink, now faded to the color of old rose, flattened and papery, and still faintly, improbably beautiful. He held it in his palm for a moment. He knew which bush it was from. He could still see the porch. He set it down. And then, at the bottom of the box, lying flat, deliberately placed last, an envelope, white, sealed. His name on the front, in her careful, architectural handwriting. The letters slightly faded but entirely legible. Keanu. Just that. Just his name. In her handwriting. On an envelope that had been sitting at the bottom of a cardboard box in various storage units and closets and attics for 25 years. Waiting. He picked it up. It was lighter than it should have been for something that heavy. He looked up at her. She was standing near the attic stairs with her arms crossed loosely. Not defensively, just holding herself. Her face was open in the way of someone who has finished deciding something and is now simply present for whatever comes next. No more rehearsing, no more managing, just here, just ready. I wrote it in September 1999, she said. Her voice was quiet and steady. I never sent it. I have moved it from house to house for 25 years without opening it. She paused. I don't know exactly why I kept it. I think I always knew you'd come back. Another pause, smaller. Or, I needed to believe you would. He looked at the envelope in his hands, at his name in her writing, at 25 years of silence folded into a single white rectangle. Read it alone, she said. I'll be in the garden. Her footsteps moved to the attic stairs. The wooden steps creaked once, twice, and then she was gone, and he was alone in the warm yellow light with the cedar smell and the old paper smell and the box and its contents arranged on the floor around him, like the evidence of something. A life lived in parallel to his own, a grief carried in the same years he was carrying his, a silence chosen in the same season that silence cost the most. He sat down on the dusty attic floor. He turned the envelope over in his hands. He looked at his name one more time. Then he opened it. The letter was 2 pages long. He could see that immediately when he unfolded it. 2 pages of her precise architectural handwriting. The lines even and unhurried, the margins clean. The handwriting of a woman who had learned to be careful with words because she understood, the way poets and set designers both understand, that how you arrange things matters as much as what you arrange. The paper had aged to the color of weak tea. The ink, dark blue, from a fountain pen she had used in those years, a pen her father had given her when she graduated, had faded to a softer shade, closer to the color of a clear sky seen through smoke. Still perfectly legible, still entirely hers. He smoothed the pages against his knee. He read, Keanu, if you are reading this, you came back. I always thought you might. Not because of me. I never assumed that, and I want to be clear about that from the very beginning. But because you are a person who eventually returns to the places where things were left unfinished. I have always known that about you. I admired it even when it made things harder. I have started this letter 4 times. 3 of those times I stopped because I was trying to protect you. I have decided, at 35 years old, sitting on the back porch of this house for what I believe is the last time, that protecting you from this particular thing is no longer something I have the right to do. 25 years is long enough to carry something alone. So here is the truth, all of it, without management. When we ended, when I called you and we said what we said, and I hung up the phone and sat on the porch and looked at the canyon, I was already 6 weeks pregnant. I found out 4 days before I called you. I had been trying to find a way to tell you. I was trying to find the right words, the right moment, the right version of a conversation that I knew was going to be large and frightening and real. And then the photograph arrived. You and Jennifer at the table in Venice Beach. And I understood that the moment I had been looking for was not coming. So I called you instead and said the other thing, the ending thing. I want you to know that the pregnancy was not the reason I ended it. I ended it because of what the photograph meant, and because I am not a person who stays somewhere she is not fully chosen. That part was true and right, and I do not regret it. But I was pregnant. And then, 3 weeks after we separated, on October 14th, 1999, on a quiet morning when the canyon was dark and I was completely alone, I lost her. Her. I knew, somehow. Not medically, you cannot know that early, they will tell you. But I knew. The way you know certain things that arrive fully formed, without evidence, without explanation. She was a girl. I named her Lena, my grandmother's name. Shirin's mother, the woman who survived the revolution with 3 languages and no house, and the absolute unshakable conviction that beauty was not a luxury, but a necessity. The toughest, most loving person I have ever known. I gave her name to my daughter because it was the best name I had, and my daughter deserved the best name I had. I did not tell you. I need to explain why, not to justify it, because I am no longer sure it was the right decision, but because you deserve to understand the decision as I made it at the time. By October 1999, Jennifer was pregnant with your daughter. I knew this. Everyone in our small, overlapping world knew this. I watched you from a distance, through mutual friends, through the occasional photograph, through the specific radar that people develop for the person they used to love. And you looked like a man already standing at the edge of something enormous. Already bracing, already afraid in the way of someone who understands that the best thing that has ever happened to them is also the most terrifying. What kind of person, I asked myself, walks up to a man standing at that edge and adds more weight? Not the kind of person I wanted to be. So I carried Lena alone. I carried the grief of losing her alongside the grief of losing us. And I did not let them become a burden I handed to you. I told myself this was kindness. I believe it was kindness. I also believe, 25 years later, sitting in a different canyon house with roses in the garden and the same light coming through the same mountains, that kindness and rightness are not always the same thing. You had a right to know she existed. I took that right from you because I thought I was protecting you, and I think I was also, if I am being completely honest, protecting myself. Because telling you would have meant existing in your life again in the hardest possible way. It would have meant being the person who brought you more grief when you were already drowning in it. And I did not know how to be that person and still remain standing. So I chose the other thing. I chose silence. I chose to be the woman who disappeared cleanly, who caused no additional damage, who carried her own losses with enough grace that nobody had to worry about her. I have been that woman for 25 years. I was good at it, but Tomas is gone now, and I am 56 years old, and I am sitting in this garden, in this canyon, in this light that still looks like it came from a painter who hadn't slept, and I am tired, not of living, not of the life I have built, but of being the only person alive who knows that Lena existed. She had a heartbeat, she had a name, she was real. I am not telling you this because I want anything from you. Not grief, not guilt, not apology, not for you to feel in any way responsible for what I chose to carry alone. That was my choice, and I made it, and I lived it, and it is mine. I am telling you because she deserves to be known by more than one person. She deserves a witness. You are her father. You are the only other person in the world who has the right to know her name, and to say it, and to hold it as something real and true and worth carrying. Her name was Lena. She existed for 6 weeks, and then she was gone, and the world never knew, and I have been the only keeper of that fact for 25 years, and I am ready, now, to share the keeping of it. That is all I am asking. Not for anything to be undone, not for the past to be different, not for you to grieve what cannot be grieved retroactively without destroying the present. Just know her name, say it once. Let her have existed in more than one heart. So did we, Keanu. We were real. What we had in this canyon, in this house, on this porch, in that hardware store in Calabasas on a Tuesday morning in August, it was real, and it was good, and it mattered, and I am grateful for every single day of it. Take care of yourself. Take care of Alexandra. She sounds, from everything I have heard, like exactly the right person. I mean that without any shadow of anything. Be well. Be happy. You have earned it more than most. D. September 14th, 1999. Topanga Canyon, California. He read it once. Then he read it again, more slowly, his lips moving slightly over certain sentences the way you move your lips over words that are too important to only read with your eyes. Then he set the pages down carefully on the attic floor beside the ticket stub, and the photograph and the pressed bougainvillea, all the small objects of a life they had briefly shared, and he put his face in his hands. And Keanu Reeves, a man who had learned to carry grief publicly, professionally, with the stoic silence that the world had turned into a mythology, sat on the dusty floor of an attic in Topanga Canyon, California, on a Saturday morning in October 2024, and wept. Not quietly, not stoically, not in the managed, contained way of a person who is aware of being observed. He wept the way a person weeps when they have been handed back a piece of themselves they did not know was missing, a piece that had been kept safe, carefully, in a cardboard box with crayon stick figures on the lid, by a woman who had carried it alone for 25 years because she loved him enough to protect him and because she was strong enough to bear what that protection cost her. He wept for Lena, for 6 weeks of a heartbeat he had never known about, for a name he was only now hearing for the first time, for a daughter who had existed in a canyon house in the hills above Los Angeles in the autumn of 1999 and then had not, and who had been loved quietly and privately and completely by a woman sitting in a garden below him. He wept for Delara, for what she had carried, for what it must have cost to carry it, for the particular courage of a person who chooses silence not out of weakness, but out of a love so clear-eyed and unselfish that it asks nothing back, not even acknowledgement. He wept for himself, for the version of himself who had been standing at the edge of one grief in October 1999, bracing for impact, completely unaware that someone nearby was standing at the edge of an identical one, alone, making the decision to stay silent so that he would not have to know. He sat on the floor for a long time. The single bare bulb swung very slightly in the warm attic air. The cedar smell wrapped around him. Outside, far below, he could hear the garden, the wind in the roses, the distant canyon, the small bright sound of the wind chimes on the porch. He picked up the letter again. He found the sentence. Her name was Lena. He said it aloud, just once, quietly, in the warm yellow light of the attic, with nobody to hear it. Lena. The name sat in the air for a moment, real and complete, and for the first time in 25 years, spoken by more than one person. Then he folded the letter carefully along its original creases. He placed it back in the envelope. He placed the envelope back in the box, on top of the ticket stub, and the photograph, and the pressed bougainvillea. He closed the box flaps gently, without resealing them. He sat for another few minutes. Then he stood up, slowly, like a man recalibrating his weight after setting something heavy down. He smoothed his jeans. He looked around the attic one last time. the labeled boxes along the wall, the low ceiling, the single bulb, the far corner where the box had waited in the dark for 25 years. He reached up and pulled the bulb cord. The attic went dark. He felt his way to the stairs. He went down. She was in the garden when he came out. Exactly where she said she would be. Sitting at the small iron table with 2 fresh cups of tea, her hands wrapped around hers, her face turned slightly toward the canyon wall, where the October light was doing its slow, inevitable descent toward gold. She had changed nothing about herself in the time he had been upstairs. She had simply waited, the way she had always waited, without performance, without anxiety, with the deep and practiced patience of a woman who had learned that some things cannot be hurried, and that the attempt to hurry them only breaks them further. She heard his footsteps on the path. She did not look up immediately. She gave him a moment, one last moment of privacy before the world between them shifted permanently into something new. This small consideration, Keanu thought, crossing the garden toward her, was so entirely and completely her that he almost had to stop walking. He sat down in the empty chair across from her. He picked up the second cup of tea, still warm, made for him, waiting for him, and held it in both hands and looked at the canyon. The silence between them lasted perhaps 30 seconds. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was not the silence of 2 people who do not know what to say. It was the silence of 2 people who have just moved through something enormous together and are standing on the other side of it, catching their breath, making sure the ground beneath them is solid before they trust it with their full weight. He spoke first. "Lena," he said, just the name, quietly, placed into the garden air between them, like something being set down on a table, carefully, deliberately, with full knowledge of its weight. Dilara looked up. Her eyes were bright, not wet, not broken, but bright in the way of someone who has just witnessed something they have been waiting a very long time to witness. A relief so complete, it had moved past the point where tears were adequate and arrived somewhere deeper and stiller. She looked at him and nodded, slowly, completely. The nod of a person who has been understood, not partially, not approximately, but entirely and exactly, and without anything left over. "That's a beautiful name," he said. "It was my grandmother's," she said. "I know," he said. "You told me about her once. On the porch." She was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, "You remembered that." "I remembered everything," he said. "I just didn't know what to do with it." The canyon light moved across the garden wall in its slow golden way. The roses, late season, overblown, extravagantly beautiful in the way of things that know they are almost finished, moved in the afternoon breeze. The wind chimes on the porch made their small, clear sound. They stayed in the garden until the light turned gold, and then amber, and then the deep, saturated purple of a California evening, settling into the canyon for the night. They did not fill the time with noise. They did not rush to resolve everything or explain everything, or tie the loose ends of 25 years into something neat and conclusive. They simply sat together in the place where their story had begun and let it be what it was. Complicated, painful, real, and in its own particular way, in the way of things that have survived long enough to find their meaning, unutterably beautiful. There is no tidy ending here. This is what makes it true. Keanu Reeves did not leave Alexandra Grant. He loves her, genuinely, completely, in the earned and specific way of a person who has been broken and rebuilt, and knows the difference between love that is convenient and love that is real. He went home that Saturday evening, and he told her something he had never told another living person. We do not know the exact words, only that she listened without flinching, without making it smaller, without asking him to protect her from the size of it. This is also who she is. This is also why he loves her. Dilara Voss still lives in the small sun-bleached house in Topanga Canyon. She still designs sets, currently working with 2 theater companies in Los Angeles and one in Portland that refuses to stop calling her back. She still has the garden. She still drinks tea in the mornings at the iron table and watches the canyon light change and finds it, even now, even after everything, worth watching. In the far corner of the garden, beneath the back wall where the afternoon sun hits longest and warmest, she planted a single rosebush in the spring of 2023, deep red. The variety is called Munstead Wood, an English rose, very old, very fragrant, the kind that blooms extravagantly and repeatedly, and does not stop until the cold finally insists. She does not explain it to visitors. She does not need to. It blooms and she tends it, and that is enough. The cardboard box is no longer in the attic. She brought it down the week after Keanu's visit and opened it properly. Took out each object, held it, placed it on the kitchen table in the light. The ticket stub, the photograph, the pressed bougainvillea, the empty envelope with his name on it in her handwriting. She kept all of it, not in a box, not sealed, not stored. She put the photograph in a frame, a small one, plain wood, and placed it on a shelf in the back room where she works on her set models. Two people on a mountain trail above Topanga Canyon, squinting into the sun, caught mid-laugh, young and unguarded, and completely unaware of everything coming toward them. She looks at it sometimes when she is working. She does not find it sad. She finds it true. Keanu and Delara are not romantic. That chapter closed in 1999, and neither of them would reopen it, and neither of them wants to. Some chapters close for real. Some endings are actual endings, and the kindest thing you can do is honor them as such, rather than mistake nostalgia for possibility. But they are something that does not have a clean, common word. Witnesses comes closest. People who have agreed, finally, to witness each other's grief. To hold between them a name that only they carry. To be, for each other, the specific kind of presence that can only exist between two people who share a loss the rest of the world never knew about. They have had dinner 3 times since that Saturday in October. Always in the garden, always in the evening, always until the light is entirely gone and the canyon has gone dark and the wind chimes on the porch are the only sound. They talk about ordinary things mostly. Her work, his work, Alexandra, Portland, the roses, the motorcycle company, a book one of them has read that the other should. They talk like people who have finished the hard conversation and discovered, on the other side of it, that they actually enjoy each other's company. That the friendship which existed underneath the love, which was always there, which was perhaps the most durable thing between them, is still intact, still warm, still worth tending. Lena's name comes up sometimes. Naturally, without ceremony. Lena would have been 25 this year. Or simply, quietly, in a pause in the conversation. One of them saying the name, and the other nodding, and both of them holding it for a moment, and then setting it down and continuing. This is what it looks like to share a grief properly. Not to perform it, not to resolve it, just to share the carrying of it so that no single person has to bear the full weight alone anymore. Keanu Reeves is 60 years old. He has survived the deaths of a best friend, a daughter, a former love. He has survived the tidal wave of global fame and the strange, exhausting experience of being turned into a symbol by a world that needed one. He has survived his own grief, not by conquering it, not by outrunning it, but by moving through it at the pace it required, which was sometimes agonizingly slow and sometimes blindsidingly fast, and always, always costly. He has survived all of that and arrived, somehow, at happiness. Real happiness, not performed, not managed, not the careful construction of a public figure who has learned what to say in interviews. The actual thing, daily and ordinary and warm. And on a Saturday in October 2024, in an attic in Topanga Canyon, he was given one more thing. Not a burden, not a weight to add to everything he already carries. A name. a small, private, particular name. A daughter who existed for 6 weeks in the autumn of 1999 in a house above a canyon in the hills of Los Angeles, who was loved completely and silently by a woman who was strong enough to carry that love alone for 25 years, and wise enough, finally, to share it. Lena. She existed. She had a heartbeat and a name, and a grandmother she was named for, and a father who sat on a dusty attic floor in October 2024 and said her name aloud for the first time, alone in the warm yellow light, with no one to hear it but the cedar and the old paper and the particular silence of things that have been kept rather than lost. She mattered. And now, finally, at last, after 25 years of being held in a single human heart, she is known by two, which is, perhaps, the closest thing to immortality that any of us ever really get. Not monuments, not headlines, not mythology, just someone who remembers, someone who says your name, someone who carries the fact of you forward into a world that never knew you were there. Lena. There, she existed. And that is the story of a name that was kept safe in a cardboard box for 25 years until the right person came back to receive it. Before you go, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching this from right now. It never stops amazing us how stories like this one find people in every corner of the planet. From small towns to big cities, from places we can barely find on a map. So tell us where you are. We read every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you think about someone you lost quietly, someone you never properly said goodbye to, someone whose name you still carry in a place you rarely talk about, then please give this video a like. It takes 1 second, and it tells us that stories about real human grief and real human love and real human courage are worth telling. That kindness is worth spreading. That the quiet losses, the ones with no headlines, no memes, no public funerals, matter just as much as the loud ones. And if you believe that too, if you think the world gets a little better when we take the time to truly see each other, then subscribe to this channel. Join the community of people who show up here for stories that remind us what it means to be human. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss what we put out next. And finally, there is another story waiting for you right now. It is on the screen in front of you. Click it. We think it will find you exactly when you need it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Lena existed, and so does your kindness, every time you share it.